The morning sun had barely crested the hills when Calder fastened the last strap of his saddle. His young dun mare, restless and eager, pawed at the earth as if she too felt the weight of the day ahead. "Easy, girl," Calder murmured, running a calming hand along her neck. Her ears flicked back, acknowledging his voice, though her muscles stayed taut with energy. The yard behind the stable was quiet except for the low creak of leather and the steady clink of iron. A flock of crows wheeled overhead, black wings catching the light as they cawed in unison, an omen Calder chose not to dwell on. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, his boots settling in the stirrups, and guided the mare toward the eastern trail. The path wound through the edge of the forest, its shadows cool and sharp even in early daylight. Twigs cracked beneath her hooves, scattering squirrels and sending a fox darting into the undergrowth. Calder kept one gloved hand close to the hilt of his sword, scanning the tree line. These roads were not as safe as they had been in his father's day. By midday, the sun burned bright overhead, and heat shimmered off the dusty track. Calder paused at a stream to let his mare drink, crouching to splash water on his own face. His reflection wavered in the ripples, brown hair damp with sweat, eyes shadowed by the strain of travel, and a jaw set with quiet determination. He was deep in thought when the first distant sound reached him, hooves. Not his own, but lighter, quicker. He stood, hand tightening around his sword. The noise grew louder, echoing between the hills, until a rider broke through the trees, a young messenger, cloak torn and face pale with fear. "Lord Calder!" the boy gasped, reins jerking as his horse skidded to a halt. "Bandits, on the north road. They've taken the prince's convoy." For an instant Calder stood motionless, the words settling like iron in his chest. Then instinct took over. In one motion he was astride his mare again, heels digging in. The horse leapt forward, muscles surging beneath him as they flew down the trail. Branches whipped past. The wind roared in Calder's ears, carrying the acrid scent of smoke. He rounded a bend, and there it was. The convoy lay in ruin. Wagons overturned, supplies scattered, armored guards either dead or dying. Flames licked at a canvas canopy, sending black smoke curling toward the sky. A voice, hoarse with command, barked orders up the road. Calder glimpsed figures on horseback, 5, maybe 6, driving a single captive toward the hills. Even at a distance, Calder recognized the flash of royal blue. The prince. "Hold fast!" Calder shouted, spurring his mare harder. The bandits turned at the warning cry, surprise flashing across their faces before they scattered like wolves. Two charged to meet him head-on, blades drawn. The clash was swift and brutal. Steel rang out, horses screamed. Calder's sword caught the first rider beneath the arm, sending him tumbling. The second wheeled sharply, slashing at Calder's side, but Calder twisted in the saddle and drove his elbow into the man's face. Blood sprayed. The rider fell. The path ahead was clear. The kidnappers fled toward the ridge, dragging the prince between them. Calder lowered himself over his horse's neck, urging her to her limits. The gap closed, yards shrinking to feet to inches. With one final surge, Calder reached them. His blade swept in a deadly arc, cutting through the ropes that bound the prince to the saddle. The young royal slumped forward, barely conscious, as Calder caught the reins and hauled both horses to a jarring stop. Behind them, the last of the bandits vanished into the trees. Calder didn't give chase. The prince came first. "Stay with me, your highness," Calder said, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. He swung down, lifting the wounded boy from the saddle. The air reeked of smoke and blood, but Calder felt only a single, cold certainty. Whoever had planned this ambush would not stop here. And he would not rest until he knew who, and why. The prince stirred weakly as Calder rode hard through the winding forest paths, every muscle in his body tense with urgency. They had no time to linger. The kidnappers might regroup, and Calder knew the ambush on the north road was far too organized to be random. The mare's flanks were slick with sweat by the time the spires of Westhaven appeared beyond the hills. Calder slowed only when the city gates loomed into view, their iron portcullis glinting in the midday sun. The guards, recognizing him at once, hurried to open the passage. Inside the courtyard of the royal keep, panic rippled as Calder carried the prince down from the saddle. Servants and soldiers rushed forward, but Calder waved them back until he laid the boy gently in the arms of the royal physician. "Arrow wound to the shoulder," Calder reported, voice clipped. "Loss of blood, but no signs of poison. He'll live." The physician nodded and disappeared inside with the prince, leaving Calder standing in the sudden hush. For a moment, his heartbeat was louder than the distant clamor of the city streets. It didn't last. "Calder!" boomed a familiar voice from the staircase. A broad-shouldered man in a green surcoat strode down 2 steps at a time. Sir Garrick, veteran knight, trusted adviser, and friend to Calder's late father. His face was grim. "The king demands your presence. Now." Calder handed his mare's reins to a stable hand and followed without a word. Through stone corridors hung with tapestries, up to the council chamber where the air itself seemed heavy with dread. The king sat at the long table's head, silver crown gleaming, fists clenched. His eyes, cold, sharp, and weary, fixed on Calder as he entered. "My son was taken," the king said without preamble. "You brought him back." A pause, long enough to measure a man's soul. "Tell me everything." Calder gave his account without flourish. The smoke, the overturned wagons, the bandits' numbers, the desperate chase. When he finished, silence held the room. At last, the king spoke again. "These were not mere highway thieves. Someone paid them. Someone bold enough to strike the royal convoy in daylight." His gaze swept over the assembled lords. "And someone inside these walls may have told them when to strike." A murmur of alarm passed through the chamber. Calder met Garrick's eyes across the table. Neither spoke, but both understood. This was treachery. The king turned back to Calder. "You will ride at first light," he commanded. "Find out who is behind this. Follow the coin. Follow the whispers. Do not return without answers." Calder bowed his head. "It will be done." As the council dispersed in uneasy silence, Garrick caught Calder by the arm. "Be careful, lad," he said under his breath. "This plot runs deeper than bandits in the woods. You can't trust every smile in this castle." Calder gave a faint, grim smile. "I never do." Outside, the sun was sinking behind the western towers, staining the sky crimson. Calder returned to the stables, checked his mare's tack, and tightened his sword belt. Tomorrow he would ride again, not to guard a prince this time, but to hunt a shadow. And shadows, Calder knew, always led to something darker. Dawn broke cold and gray over Westhaven, the kind of morning that carried a hint of rain. Calder was already in the saddle before the city gates opened, his mare's breath steaming in the chill air. He rode alone, carrying only what he needed: a bedroll, rations for 3 days, and a pouch heavy with the king's coin to loosen stubborn tongues. The northern road was quiet now, too quiet. The bloodstains from yesterday's fight had already been washed away by night dew and scavengers. Calder slowed his mare, eyes scanning every rut and hoofprint. A fresh trail curved into the woods, half hidden by branches deliberately dragged across it. "Too careless," Calder muttered. Whoever had passed here wanted to be followed, or didn't care if they were. He pressed on, following the track through tangled undergrowth until he came upon a burned-out cottage. The air still smelled faintly of smoke. A cart lay overturned in the yard, crates smashed open. No coin, no supplies, nothing of value left behind. But the scorch marks were wrong. Black powder residue, not pitch or oil. Military work. Calder dismounted to take a closer look, and froze. A glint of metal in the ashes. He crouched and fished out a fragment of armor, a pauldron plate bearing a sigil scratched almost smooth by fire. "Not bandits, then. Mercenaries. Who paid you to do this?" he murmured under his breath. The sound of snapping twigs answered him. Calder's hand went to his sword hilt just as 3 figures emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. Their leader, a scarred man with a crooked nose, grinned. "You're far from the city, rider," the man sneered. "Roads aren't safe these days." Calder didn't waste breath on warnings. His blade cleared its scabbard in a single motion, catching the morning light. The fight was fast and brutal. Calder sidestepped the first rush, cutting low to drop one attacker, then turned and drove his shoulder into the second man's chest, sending him sprawling. The leader fought harder, steel ringing on steel, but Calder's training showed. A feint, a twist, and the mercenary's sword went spinning into the dirt. "Talk," Calder demanded, blade pressed to the man's throat. "Who sent you?" The mercenary spat blood, eyes defiant. "You think I'm afraid of you? We get paid whether we live or die." "Not if you're dead," Calder said evenly. "Last chance." The man hesitated, then laughed, low and harsh. "Follow the coin to Black Hollow. But you won't like what you find." Before Calder could press further, the man wrenched free, driving Calder's sword aside long enough to draw a dagger and plunge it into his own chest. He crumpled without a sound. The forest fell silent again. Calder swore under his breath and wiped his blade clean. Whoever was behind this, they had men willing to die rather than talk. He mounted up and turned his mare north. Black Hollow lay 2 days' ride beyond the hills, a den of thieves and worse. If the trail led there, Calder would follow, even into darkness itself. But deep down, he knew, this was no longer about saving a prince. This was about stopping something far bigger. Black Hollow did not welcome strangers. The settlement crouched in a narrow gorge like a wounded animal, crooked lanes, sagging roofs, and the stench of smoke and unwashed bodies rising from every alley. Calder reined in his mare just outside the gates. A pair of guards, if they could be called that, lounged by a broken post, their spears more for show than for defense. "Name your business," one slurred, his eyes flicking to the coin pouch on Calder's belt. "Passing through," Calder replied evenly. His gaze stayed cold, unreadable. "Looking for a bed and a meal." The man grunted, waved him on. In Black Hollow, suspicion cost extra, and silver outweighed suspicion every time. Calder rode slowly down the main track. The crooked tavern signs and half-shuttered windows told their own story. This was a place where mercenaries drank, thieves bartered, and men vanished without a trace. Somewhere in this pit was the coin trail he'd been warned to follow. He chose a tavern called the Broken Anvil, noisy enough to cover whispered questions, dark enough to hide a stranger's face. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and ale. Calder ordered bread and a mug he didn't intend to drink, then waited. Sooner or later, someone would notice the lone rider with a soldier's bearing. It didn't take long. A wiry man with quick eyes slid onto the bench opposite him. "You're looking for work," the man said, more statement than question. "Maybe," Calder said. "Depends on the pay." The man smiled, thin and sharp. "Depends on the courage. Black Hollow pays well if you're not afraid of getting your hands dirty." "I've been paid to do worse," Calder replied, keeping his tone casual. "Who's buying swords these days?" "Not here," the man whispered, leaning closer. "Up in the hills. Old mine shaft. No questions asked, no names given. Bring a blade and they'll give you a sack of silver." Calder's jaw tightened. This was the lead he'd come for. "And if I want a bigger share?" The man's grin widened. "Earn their trust. Do a job, then you'll meet the man in charge." Before Calder could press further, the tavern door slammed open. 3 men strode in, the kind who killed first and argued later. Calder recognized the sigil burned into one man's leather jerkin, the same mercenary crest he'd seen on the scorched armor fragment. The wiry man froze, eyes darting to the door. "You didn't hear it from me," he hissed, then vanished into the crowd. Calder stayed still, hand resting on his sword hilt under the table. The mercenary scanned the room, then moved toward him with grim purpose. The first man spoke. "You ride too far from home, soldier. Some roads aren't meant to be walked alone." "Good thing I'm not walking," Calder said lightly. But his muscles coiled, ready to strike. The lead mercenary sneered. "Drop your steel and maybe we'll let you leave breathing." Calder's answer was the flash of a blade leaving its scabbard. The tavern erupted into chaos as steel rang against steel, benches overturned, and patrons scrambled for cover. Calder fought with precise, brutal efficiency, cutting one man down and driving the others back toward the door. But they didn't fight to win, only to delay him. As they retreated, the leader spat a final warning. "Keep following the trail, soldier. You'll find more than coin waiting in the dark." Then they were gone. Calder wiped his blade clean and tossed silver on the table. He had his lead. Tonight, he would ride for the old mine shaft. Whatever waited there, it was bigger than mercenaries, and closer than the king's court realized. The night wind cut sharp across the high ridges as Calder urged his mare up the winding track. Black Hollow had fallen silent behind him, swallowed by darkness, but the words of the mercenary still burned in his ears. "You'll find more than coin waiting in the dark." The abandoned mine shaft lay half-collapsed beneath a jagged bluff. Moonlight silvered the broken timbers and rusted pulley wheels, turning the place into a graveyard of forgotten labor. Calder dismounted, boots crunching over loose gravel, and led his horse into the shadows. A faint glow pulsed from deeper within, torchlight, flickering against the rock. Someone was here. Calder slipped inside, moving with the silence of a man who had crept through ambushes before. Voices carried from the main tunnel. Two men stood guard near a crude table littered with coin pouches and ledgers. Further in, the passage widened into a cavern where half a dozen figures were unloading crates from a cart. Not or weapons. Swords and crossbows, polished and deadly. Calder's eyes narrowed. This was no simple smuggler's den. Whoever ran this place had coin, supply lines, and ambition. "Easy work," one guard muttered, jingling his pay. "No questions, just haul and get paid." "Don't get greedy," the other snapped. "The master doesn't like talk." The master. So there was someone higher still. Calder waited, counting movements, mapping shadows. When the guards shifted, he struck, swift, silent. A knife to the throat, a sword hilt to the skull. The bodies slid into the dark without a sound. Inside the cavern, he crept closer. The workers were mercenaries, not miners, and they moved with soldierly precision. At the far end, a tall man in a hood inspected the crates, giving curt orders. Calder recognized the sigil stitched on his cloak, the same crest from the tavern fight. "This shipment goes east by dawn," the hooded man said. His voice carried the command of someone used to obedience. "No delays. The king's patrols are already sniffing too close." One mercenary grumbled, "And if they find us?" "Then they die," the hooded man replied coldly. Calder's pulse hardened. This was bigger than he'd feared, armed cells moving weapons against the crown. He shifted his weight to move closer, but a loose stone betrayed him with a sharp crack. Heads turned. "Who's there?" Steel rasped from scabbards as torches swung toward him. Calder leapt from the shadows, blade flashing. He cut down the first man before the alarm fully rang out, but the cavern exploded into chaos. Mercenaries closed in, arrows hissed off the rock walls, and Calder fought to keep from being surrounded. The hooded man barked, "Kill him!" and vanished through a side tunnel as his soldiers pressed the attack. Calder cut a path through three men, grabbed a torch, and sprinted after the leader. The side tunnel twisted sharply and ended at an old lift shaft. The rope creaked as the hooded man descended into the darkness below. Calder didn't hesitate. He seized the rope and slid down, burning his palms raw. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber lit by a single lantern. The hooded man waited, sword drawn. "You should have stayed out of this, soldier," he said, pulling back his hood. Calder froze for a heartbeat. He knew that face. Once a commander of the king's own guard, long thought dead in a border skirmish. "Irinder," Calder said grimly. "The king mourned you." Irinder smiled without warmth. "The king is a fool. While he plays at peace, I prepare for war." Their blades met in a shower of sparks. The fight was brutal and close. No feints, no wasted motion, just two trained killers striking for the heart. Calder blocked a thrust, countered with a slash, barely dodged a riposte that cut his sleeve. But Arinder was faster than memory and fought like a man who'd sold his soul for strength. A ringing blow knocked Calder's sword aside, and pain flared as Arinder's blade scored his ribs. "You can't stop it," Arinder hissed, raising his sword for the killing blow. "The kingdom will fall from within." Calder, bleeding and desperate, drove his shoulder into Arinder, slamming him against the lantern's stand. The flame toppled, spilling fire across the dry timbers. Smoke roared upward as the chamber caught. Arinder staggered back, cursing, and Calder snatched up his fallen blade. But a sudden rumble shook the ground. The old mine was collapsing under the heat. Calder lunged for the tunnel even as Arinder disappeared behind a wall of smoke and falling rock. He barely made it to the surface as the shaft caved in behind him, choking dust billowing into the night. The hooded traitor was alive. Calder knew it in his gut. And now the crown had an enemy within its own ranks, a man who knew every weakness of the royal guard. Calder tightened his blood-slick grip on his sword. The game had changed. This was no longer about coin or mercenaries. This was treason, and war was coming.